President Vladimir Putin's unilateral ceasefire has come into effect in Ukraine, according to Russian state television. But Ukraine's leader has dismissed the 36-hour pause in fighting that coincides with the Orthodox Christmas holiday. Volodymyr Zelensky says Russia is attempting to stop a Ukrainian advance in the Donbas region.
Those who continued the terror against our country and sent all these people of yours to be slaughtered, rejecting our proposals to stop Russian aggression, definitely do not value life and, moreover, do not strive for peace. They now want to use Christmas as a cover, albeit briefly, to stop the advances of our boys in Donbas and bring equipment, ammunitions and mobilized troops closer to our positions. What will that give them? Only yet another increase in their total losses.
And it's a bleak holiday season for millions of Ukrainians who are struggling to get by without power and water. Many are in need of food and medicine. Others are fleeing the devastation left behind by fighting in the eastern regions. Well, let's go live to Charles Stratford, who's in Kyiv for us. I guess the big question, Charles, is going to be what Ukraine does next while Russia institutes this pause.
I think the first sort of questions you should be asked is just how much Russia is going to institute this pause. There's a huge skepticism here, as we heard from the Ukrainian president there, as to the real motivation for this announcement, for this unilateral ceasefire by the Russian president. Zelensky calling it a cover-up, potentially giving Russian forces an opportunity to move more equipment closer to the front lines, more personnel. That was supplemented by a tweet by the Ukrainian Foreign Minister Dmytro Kuleba last night, who said that anything like this from President Putin offering some sort of ceasefire should not be taken seriously. Kuleba drawing attention to the fact that on Christmas Eve, for example, a massive rocket strike against the city of Kherson in the south killed at least 10 civilians and injured many more. And then, of course, we've had, over the New Year period, huge barrages of so-called kamikaze drones and Russian cruise missiles targeting energy infrastructure here in Kyiv and across the country. So, as I say, there is huge skepticism from the get-go about this kind of announcement from Putin. It's highly unlikely that we'll see really any kind of change in game plan by the Ukrainians militarily. I think also it's interesting, aside from the military perspective, to draw attention to the gradual move by the Ukrainians away from what they say or any kind of perception of being in any way close to the Russian Orthodox Church. It was 2019 where the Ukrainians set up a church that they say has no affiliation. They don't want any influence from the Moscow Patriarch whatsoever. And also there seems to be a gradual movement that is sort of escalated in recent years by many people in Ukraine that don't want any association with the Russian Orthodox Church or the Julian calendar at all, and are advocating that Christmas actually be celebrated according to the Gregorian calendar on the 24th and the 25th of December. So, yeah, whether it be militarily or, if you like, with respect to when Christmas should be celebrated, there is great skepticism here in Ukraine, and many people saying this was just Vladimir Putin trying to get, if you like, some sort of moral high ground across the Slavic, certainly Slavic-speaking, and the Orthodox Christian world.
Yeah, we are, of course, on the eve of Orthodox Christmas. How are Ukrainians coping on that time?
Well, you can imagine, Rob, yeah, the situation is pretty bleak, and most especially close to the front lines, you know, in the Donbas area, in the east and the south. We're expecting services, Orthodox Christmas services, to be held today and tomorrow. But the humanitarian situation across the country, as you alluded to in the intro, is desperate. The country's still needing billions of dollars of humanitarian aid a month. This escalation or slight escalation that we saw in fighting around Kherson, which of course was liberated by the Ukrainians in November, that shelling that I alluded to earlier, we saw a lot of people who had moved back to Kherson since moving out again. afraid of that shelling. It's a similar kind of scenario right the way down through along the eastern front line, where over the last 24 hours we've heard of heavy fighting all the way from the north towns along the Donetsk and Lugansk border, like Tolskay, all the way down through Bakhmut, that flashpoint town. We're hearing actually reports that we cannot verify by Russian telegram channels saying that Russian forces have moved into the town of Solidar. Now that's north of Bakhmut. An illustration of how intense the fighting still is there, and that continues all the way down through to towns like Avdiivka, close to Russian-occupied Donetsk, and further south to towns like Marienka as well. So yeah, a very bleak Orthodox Christmas for millions of Ukrainians as the fighting continues.
Charles Stratford, live for us in Kyiv. Charles, thanks very much indeed.